So I'm going to talk to you a bit today about some of the work we're doing and make the case for partnerships with nonprofits, non-government organizations to help extend your reach in the floodplain. So we were basically working, trying to save wetlands in 2006. We were working in this space, the grassy part there, working with Corps of Engineers and regulators trying to save those wetlands, when suddenly we discovered sea level rise, or it discovered us. And we realized that with a couple of feet of sea level rise that predicted we'd have then, these wetlands were going to go away. Wetlands can accrete vertically about 2 feet a century. We, at that time, were going to get 2.5 feet. We're now at 4.5 feet. So we suddenly were without a place to work. And we realized that we were going to have to shift our focus because those wetlands want to egress uphill, and there's somebody already there. So we were going to have to start working with to figure out how to get those people out of the way and keep more people from being there. So we went out with a message that was, okay, save your wetlands from climate change. Well, people don't care about wetlands, and they want to argue with you about climate change. So that was a non-starter. So after a couple of years of beating our heads against that one, we went out and did a strategic reset. We had community meetings. We took the transcripts, and we pushed them through Tag Cloud to figure out, to get a visualization of what people wanted to talk about. And this was actually what people wanted to talk about. So that was our second big aha moment. You know, you can barely find wetlands in this Tag Cloud. What you see is flooding, insurance. All the stuff that people wanted to talk about was, hey, keep my community safe from flooding. So we switched our frame and began to work with that issue, and because we could get to the same place. If we could keep the community safe from flooding, we could probably keep people off the shoreline, which is what we wanted. So we essentially went out and we said that, you know, the solution lies beyond today's shoreline. This is a shoreline in Matthews County in Virginia, and that shoreline's moving about 4 feet a year. And so we're now looking at, okay, what do you do with that house? What do you do with that road to that house in that tree line? So we realized that we were going to have to move uphill, and we were going to have to move shoreward with the solution. So who occupies the space that we want to try to fix? Well, local governments. Local governments control land use decisions. Local governments place all the stormwater, roads, all the infrastructure, and they administer a whole lot of federal programs. And so we were going to have to start working with local government in new ways. The other thing about local governments is that's where wet, angry people go. They don't go to Washington. They don't go to the state capitol. They go to the county board or the city council. And so local governments were on the front lines of dealing with the flooding that we were seeing. And then finally, the land that we were after was not regulated by any of the agencies that we were used to dealing with. And so we were going to have to engage with a whole lot of land use decisions and walk into your world, the floodplain world, because that was where the action was if we wanted to save the resource we were after. So we started hanging out with local government staff and started to understand all of these processes and understand all the pressures and limitations they were under. We even started going to floodplain managers meetings. And I remember I was in a floodplain managers meeting in our region in Southeast Virginia with Shannon Hulst, who some of you may know. She worked with us. She now runs the CRS program in Barnstable County. And there was somebody there from ISO droning on about the CRS program. And we had no idea, I at the time had no idea what the CRS program was. So I sort of perked up a bit, and they started talking about Activity 400. And there was some green stuff on the screen. I said, wait a minute, that looks like our ecosystem. What is this all about? And then she went on about Activity 420, and I about lit up. It was like, wait a minute, that's our stuff. You're talking about open space in the floodplain, that's what we're after. And you actually can get reductions for flood insurance? You mean I can monetize this work? I don't have to blather on about ecosystem services and all the stuff that people's eyes glaze over at city council meetings. So we then became real energized about all of the FEMA programs, about CRS, and actually discovered all of your alphabet soup. And Shannon became certified floodplain manager. She's now gone. Mary Carson Stiff, who many of you probably know, came on and began to move this program forward. And she's a certified floodplain manager. She's also, as we began to participate in these groups, in a CRS working group in Southeast Virginia in Hampton Roads, we took a leadership role. We actually raised money, and MC Mary Carson is now the chair of the CRS working group in Southeast Virginia. She's on the board of the State Floodplain Managers Association in Virginia. And we began to raise money to do outreach. And so she was doing visits with local governments before their CAV visits, before their ISO reviews. We began to do open space reviews with localities. We got some money from the Coastal Zone Management Program to actually do outreach into rural counties where travel budgets and staff limitations really limit the ability of a lot of rural counties to fully understand and participate in the CRS program. So we began to do a whole lot of CRS and flood insurance outreach. That's smiling Mary Carson there in the corner. She would be here giving this talk, but she's about 3 weeks away from delivering her second daughter, so I get to come here in her place on my birthday. So we began to do a whole lot of work on the NFIP. And we also began to put together some of the things we've learned. One of the things we learned was that the CRS manual is completely impenetrable to the actual local staff. And so we put together a study. This was some work that Shannon did. We would have done it in yellow and black, The Idiot's Guide to CRS, but we had to use our logos and our color. But we began to put together a series of reports that outlined some of the problem areas we were running into to try to explain it. We did a cost-benefit, we were paid to do by the Coastal Zone Management Program to do a cost-benefit study to make the case that more counties and more cities ought to be enrolled in the CRS. And we've done a whole series of studies. So all of this work, running the CRS Regional Working Group, doing all this outreach, we've raised and spent about $250,000 over the last 5 years. Most of this money came from foundations. This is money that governments cannot access because most of these foundations won't give to governments. So we have begun to raise money, and in a state that's resource limited, especially since the recession, that can't do the CRS outreach, we've become the CRS outreach agent in the state on our own dime. So here's an excellent example of where finding partnerships with some of these NGOs, with people like us, can be a real force extender. So another thing that we looked at was we were in these communities, and they needed some floodproofing before the storm. After the storm, it's relatively easy. There's lots of open space, there's political will, and there's money. What do you do before the storm? So we said, what if we went into a community, a tidal community? We picked one in Norfolk. It was African-American predominantly, lower moderate income, historic. You try to work in a historic neighborhood, and it's really tough. And we said, okay, can we flood-proof this community out to, say, 2075, and do it in such a way that we maintain or extend ecosystem services? So we went and got, as Steve did, we found a lot of smart people in universities. So we got a team of architects from Hampton University that had a senior course requirement, and a team of civil engineers from Old Dominion University that had a senior project design. We put them together. They had worked together in the past on some projects. And we put them into this community. And we basically did a community assessment. That's Mary Carson and Shannon there. And we talked to the community about where is it flooding, what's going on, what are you people willing to put up with, what's your relationship with the water, good and bad. And we did a complete community survey and came up with a rough plan for the community. And over the course of the year, we got to a conceptual design for this community to flood-proof it. And the students who did it won an award. And if you'll notice, this looks like the face of what you want your organization to look like in about 10 years. Diversity, youth, a lot of energy. So we were bringing people into this field, looking at this as a professional career track. This plan was then put up to about 20% designed by the city of Norfolk, submitted for the HUD National Disaster Resilience Competition, and lo and behold, these students were the origin of a $120 million grant for the city of Norfolk to actually flood-proof this neighborhood. This work is going on right now. So as Steve was saying, there's a lot of really good stuff that come out of partnerships with universities, a lot of smart talent, and it's pretty cheap because they got to do this work anyway. So we've then gone on and we've started expanding this work. We did some work in the next community up from the one we were working in. It was just 1 kilometer up the river. And what we found was completely different solutions. Same process, different solutions. So we started bringing in more student teams. We had 6 student teams on the ground in Hampton Roads last semester. We're looking to expand that. We got a foundation grant to do this work. And so we're, again, bringing resources into the community to do this work at no cost to the government, resources that wouldn't be available to the government. So one of the other things that we found living in a coastal community, so I'm sitting behind a car stalled in a flooded intersection, watching its hazard lights blinking off the water, and my phone buzzes, and I get this message. It's 6 o'clock. So this message says somewhere between 5 and midnight it's going to flood. I'm like, really? So this is the best you can do? And unfortunately it is. So, this is the message that's completely non-actionable. If it's 5 o'clock, I pick my kid up from track practice. If it's midnight, I could care less. I'll put my car at the high end of the driveway, I live in an X zone, and, go to sleep. It also didn't tell me how deep's the water, where is it? Is it salt water? I won't drive through salt water. I'll drive through 2 inches of fresh water. I won't drive through 4 inches of fresh water. So this information was completely inactionable because we didn't have the data. So we said, how are we going to get this data? Who knows more about where it floods in their neighborhood but the people who live there? So we developed a smartphone app. It's Sea Level Rise. That's the logo down in the corner. It's available as iPhone, Android, and we organized teams of people to go out and start mapping with their smartphones. And this is what you get. You can drop trouble pins. The red dots are, hey, I know it floods there every time. And then during an actual flood event, you can walk the perimeter of the inundation zone, drop pins. This one looks like a shark. This is my favorite. This is one I did with my kids, and it's some interior flooding, so it's really hard to do straight modeling projections. So you get that data, and you export it as a CSV file, and then emergency managers, transportation planners, or modelers. We used Derek Loftus at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. You can use this data to perfect their models. So we then partnered with even more people, a lot of media outlets in Hampton Roads, and ran a big event around the king tide, the highest perigean tide that we get in the fall. In 2017, we had about 700 people out mapping. We did it again last year, had about 300 people out mapping, fewer people, better data. 125 high schools. The local public television station got a grant from a foundation to develop compliant curriculum, and we're now into the high schools. The high schoolers are mapping. They're learning about flooding. This is a really robust PPI opportunity if it's jiggered right. And the coolest thing is that we're in the Guinness Book of Records because we collected, the most data points for. Anyway, it's a really interesting project. We're now moving it ahead this year. We're going to run it year-round so that we can catch the rain flooding and not just the tidal flooding, and develop more robust models. So this was about $70,000 worth of work over the last few years, most of which came from foundations, most of which would not be available to government agencies. We also have gotten a whole lot of people organized in the community in ways that you probably couldn't get to with just a straight-on outreach effort. Another thing that we learned was nonprofits, our groups, can speak truth to power in ways that government staff can't. So we were hearing lots of complaints from people about, I'm waiting forever for somebody from FEMA to come out and fix my home. And we said, well, how long you gotta wait? So we went out and we surveyed 5 localities where we could get decent data. How many severe repetitive loss properties do you have waiting for mitigation? How much does it cost per structure on average? How much do you get from FEMA? And we did 4th grade math, and this is what we came up with. So in the city of Norfolk, if you're the 900th person in line, you'll wait 188 years until somebody shows up with some hazard mitigation money. So this was, well, in Hampton, it's only 80 years, so you're cool there. So we said, this is outrageous. So we went to the regional state senator and we said, this is a mess. He said, I agree. And he introduced legislation that we basically looked at a similar a revolving loan fund that had been set up post-Sandy in Connecticut. And we said, let's do one of these in Virginia. We worked for 2 years through 2 legislative sessions and finally have a coastal resilience fund in Virginia. Doesn't have a dime in it, but we're now working to try to get some money in it. We then worked with the Southern Environmental Law Center in South Carolina. There's a bill in the South Carolina legislature to set up a similar fund. It's made it through the first year. They're hoping to get it enacted in the second year. And there's another fund like this down in Texas that's been set up. So here's some additional monies to bring to the problem that, again, because we were able to develop the data and speak to the legislators directly, we were able to get this work done. Another issue that we've run into is everybody talks about nature-based solutions. They're a pain in the neck in the coastal plain because you put in a bioswale and suddenly it's a wet pond. And it's a much different situation. We realized that we were going to need to develop some sophistication within the landscape industry on this. Lots of cool practices out there, but each of them requires a lot of sophistication for the design, the installation, and the maintenance. We went out and found hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of installations that had been weed-whacked out of existence because the maintenance crews didn't know that those were salt-tolerant native plants in there, and they just whacked them out of the way. We held a statewide conference. We had 200 people show up. The one issue that they said was we need professional engagement on this. So we set up a program with some partners in the state of Maryland, the Chesapeake Landscape Professional Program, where we train and certify professional landscapers from design to maintenance in these practices. We've trained over 400 now. We're expanding into Delaware and Pennsylvania. And we have a whole suite of partners that we've worked with, a whole lot of funders. Again, all foundation funders that would not be accessible to government. And we spent about $600,000 on this project over the last 6 years and have a viable certification and training program that pretty much can be exported anywhere. One of the things we also ran into is local governments were out there trying to deal with the flooding, no state programs, no federal programs. And so they were doing all these really cool hacks and workarounds using this little bit of statute, this little bit of floodplain management language. This code changed this way allows you to do additional protection. And we found that there was some cool stuff going on, but it wasn't being translated from one county to another, one city to another. And so we went out and we interviewed over 70 local government staff, and we put together a local government adaptation guide. It's on our website, wetlandswatch.org, and it has a whole compendium of things that localities can do while waiting for the state and the feds to step up. Most importantly, what we did was we took these functions and we pushed them through the CRS manual. And in this website, you can now say, if you do this, this is the activity within the CRS manual that you can get credits for. And so we began to use this to feed, again, the incentives for getting into the CRS program. We've also then added on to it where you get stormwater credits under MS4 or other stormwater regulatory programs so that we begin to stack the benefits. So you're not just getting flood protection, you're also getting stormwater credits. And you can then draw from your stormwater fees, you can draw from your FEMA fees, you can draw from anywhere and begin to do the same practices in the city. This was a $70,000 foundation grant that would not have come to a local government because most of these foundations don't give to localities. The last piece of work that we're doing right now is really cool. We've just started raising money for this. We're about halfway there. City of Chesapeake has some properties they acquired through a mitigation grant program. FEMA says plant Bermuda grass and mow it. The city goes, I'm getting real tired of this. This is a pain in my neck. These are the 4 sites that we're dealing with right now. And so we're working with a local land trust to see, can we flip these properties into a land trust, change the easements in a way that FEMA's okay with, but that we can begin to do other work on it. So the city of Chesapeake wants to give us 4 parcels, these 4 parcels to play with. And we're basically looking at, if once we get these parcels into a land trust, we can then probably go get some foundation money to restore the ecosystem. And if we restore the ecosystem, if we turn that back into a wetland, which it was before it was filled in the 1960s, can we do other things with it? If we put in restoration work that generates nutrient credits, can we sell those credits? Can we turn this into a nutrient credit bank and make money to buy that house next door? Can we set up a wetlands bank? I don't like wetlands banks, but I'm looking the other way on this one because if we could put a wetland in there that develops tidal wetlands credits, can we sell those credits and then use that to buy the house next door? So we're just at the front end of exploring how you bring land trusts into the picture to begin to change the way that these easements are on the property to allow other beneficial uses. We've got another project in Norfolk that's a part of this. Norfolk basically divided the city up into a coastal zone and an upland zone. They've imposed resilience points on anybody who wants to develop in the city. You've got to do certain things and gain all these points. One way you can get these points is a developer wants to build up here. They go downhill and they find somebody who wants out of their property. And in a private transaction, they remove the development rights and they basically put the property into this land trust. and they say, you know what, well, you want to get out of this property, or when a certain trigger point is reached, and we're working now on rolling easements on this property, when it gets inundated to a certain extent, when you got spartina in your front lawn, when your lawn turns into a jurisdictional wetland, you got to get off the property, take the house off, and restore that property. And again, this is a private transaction, so it's bringing commercial money into the picture that would not be available for this kind of hazard mitigation work. And so we're going to try to see if we can raise the other half of the money we need, try to see if we can do this. The city of Norfolk wants to give us a couple parcels to play with as well to begin to develop the economics of this. So let me close. Strategic partnerships will extend the reach, access to new funding. We can reach audiences that you can't. And also, you bring a credibility to our work. We're not there arguing about ecosystem services and having people's eyes glaze over. We're actually talking about community protection. And that's a critical piece of the equation. And finally, we have the flexibility to move in ways that government agencies don't. We can find a problem, go find some money, and get into the picture very quickly and fill in the gaps and begin to put some of the pieces of this puzzle together. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you very much.